Good evening. I'm Shannon Powell, co-founder of No Surrender New York, a PAC dedicating to fighting the radical right in New York and expanding our Democratic majority.
Hi, and I am Tom Watson, also a founder of No Surrender. Welcome to tonight's event with Rachel Bitecofer on going on offense and messaging for the midterms. Rachel is a political scientist, a television analyst, and author of the upcoming book, Hit 'em Where It Hurts: How to Save Democracy by Beating Republicans at Their Own Game. And I think that'll be one of our main topics here tonight. Rachel most famously predicted the 2018 blue wave long before other analysts, although I was following her on Twitter, and I got the early sense of where things might be going from her. So she's a must follow, by the way, for everyone out there who is on Twitter. So welcome, Rachel. Thanks for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure to be here in New York, New York. I'm so excited. I love the state.
Great. So Rachel, we get the sense right now that there is some movement out there. Some of the fundamentals, as we were talking about earlier, are inching towards positive territory for the Democrats. We've got some serious issues that are taking a big chunk out of the Republicans, and some truly frightful candidates on that side, including right here in New York. So you identified negative partisanship as a powerful force in our politics, which is a big part of 2018. Are you seeing similar signs now, different ones? And how should everybody who's here tonight start to look at the election and how it's going to shape up?
Yeah, great, Tom. I'll take it just a step back, so in case anybody doesn't have the background of negative partisanship. So in 18, what I was talking about really came out of my research at the university and the polling center I ran, which my dissertation was on political polarization, is this concept that as America is polarized, and when we talk about polarization, it's important for people to know it's not a buzzword, it's a quantitative behavioral characteristic that political scientists like myself can measure and assess in various components. So people, right? We call the mass public, politicians, electeds, our courts, our institutions have polarized to an extent. So it's not a buzzword. It's a thing that has changed, tangentially changed political behavior. And I started arguing, listen, you have a demographic like advantage on the left, and when that meets this angst. So what it is, negative partisanship is I'm a Democrat, okay? But I have like feels about the Republican Party that are shaped and grounded in my own partisanship as a Democrat, okay? So I have like the things I'm proud to be a Democrat. I love, it's, I'm like this policy, that policy, that's why I'm a Democrat. Those are positive attributes of my partisanship. But there's a second component, which is how I feel about the other option. In America, this is obviously more heightened because there's two options and not seven, right? So there's one option to disqualify and to really bring out. And when we think about polarization, like that's always been like that. I mean, I don't need to tell anybody that's over 60 on this call that the Reagan blowback was pretty intense. So was the 90s with Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton and all of that. But you'll have to believe me when I say that actually quantitatively, we really start to see polarization take off after 2000, and it gains a lot of steam after 2010. And it's because Republicans start to realize, instead of talking to the the voters that they're trying to turn out and get to vote for them about things they can do for them, they're going to structure their regime more around the protection they can provide from us, right? And that should sound pretty similar because if you fast forward 10 years further down the line, early in us versus them frame that has been cultivated on the radical right, and is really at the base of so many of the angsty stressful things that we're dealing with domestic security right now. But how it affects voting behavior is this: when you're in power, you feel comfortable. You control the Supreme Court picks, you're getting policy, maybe not everything you want, but you're certainly not seeing things like Obamacare get repealed, immigrant children being separated, things like that, right? And when you have that happen to you, like when that's going on and you're the out party, you get angsty. So in 2016 with Clinton, there's a couple things that happened. One of them is losing the conversion poll to Trump, but the other thing that happened was Democrats A lot of people didn't vote that could have, and a lot of them voted for third-party ballots because they thought the race was in the bag. And in 2018, what I understood was, okay, now what we're going to see is something we haven't seen ever because Obama was in power for 8 years. We're going to see, what does this demographic change look like once it gets an accelerant put on it, okay? And in the 2018 cycle, that accelerant was especially profound in the House because of demographic change over that 10 years. The 2018 cycle and the 2020 cycle were the last two on the old maps. And it had not, it was prime opportunity for Republicans to lose voters in the suburbs. And it was good timing for Democrats to be able to come in, make a case about the opposition party. Even if they didn't make the case got made every day in the news cycle, and they could expand on their House majority. The Senate map was the opposite. It was a de-aligning map. And so it was much harder for them to have a good cycle on the Senate side. But anyway, what that means is as soon as you lose or win the presidency, the entire political game board resets. And it's not overnight, but you can see this in polling data and you can anticipate it. If you're me, can say, okay, Joe Biden got sworn in. We should expect to see a decline in his approval ratings, and B, we should also see the generic ballot and like the atmosphere shift to benefit the out party, who is now the Republican Party, okay? And that's why so many people have been so pessimistic about our odds this cycle, myself included. I deal in data, right? I don't deal with ostrich stuff. So that's why we were like, okay, now Republicans have lost Trump. He's made up this big lie about it being stolen. There's a lot of passion on that side, and we don't have passion on our side. Roe has changed that, right? Roe is such I can't even describe how cataclysmic it is. Okay, I suspected it would be. Saw all those spontaneous rallies pop up across the country. And, that's a good data sign. We saw that in 2017 as an antecedent to the blue wave. Lots of people in the streets doing activism. Yeah, it doesn't move votes, but it tells us there's enthusiasm, right? And then, of course, now we have some really good hard data. And that's coming from the state of Kansas, where the issue was focused on and the verdict was unequivocal. All right. So that Roe thing has really shifted one of those worst fundamentals that worked against us, which was enthusiasm, because enthusiasm is not driven by good work and great deeds. It's sad to say, it's by threat and fear. And now the women especially, but many people on the left, gay Americans included, other marginalized groups, are terrified. And that is going to make them much more likely to tune in and to vote. Okay. And then it's a matter of like how much you tap into that. We did not intentionally exploit angst well in 18 or 20. In 18, it did not cost us much. It cost us probably the Senate majority or closer to the Senate majority, but it didn't cost us a lot. In 2020, as you guys know, we lost 14 seats in the House under the best fundamentals that a party could ever be running a national campaign under. The incumbent president is telling people to drink bleach and 3,000 Americans are dying a day, right? So if you can't make the case then, right, means you don't have a system to make a case. And that's what we have been fixing ever since. And we're really starting to see the changes, right? So Roe happened, and that's a huge thing, but the conversion pool narrowing, the generic ballot that Tom and Shannon and I talked about a little bit before the meeting, which is the preference of your average voter to have Republicans or Democrats control Congress in the fall. That thing has indicated too that Roe and the Jan 6 stuff, just the treason stuff, is starting to tell independents, maybe I'm not into change right now. And that ultimately, guys, as we're going to talk mostly about messaging here, is the main contingent of this strategic messaging initiative that we're pushing, which is to get people to understand, like, you must make it salient and threatening. You must focus on freedom and the big, broad macro fundamentals of the cycle. And we must create to make up for these fundamentals that aren't in our side. We must make the atmosphere favor us as much as possible. And the way to do that is to get the attention and keep it on the Republican Party's messes.
So Rachel, just kind of piggybacking on this, we've had a run of good news as Democrats, major legislation, a good jobs report, inflation is declining. We're always hearing that Democrats need to run on their accomplishments. Does it work? And should Democrats spend their resources highlighting the progress that they've made?
Yeah, this of course is kind of like coming out from the Obama era, right? Like they didn't credit claim enough on saving the economy and didn't run on Obamacare and make it popular, right? So I'm definitely a big fan of the reforms, but I will say this, like the groups and organizations that I'm working with, teaching them to do that credit claiming in a way that double dips so that it builds our brand up, but also decreases their brand. And it can be just, you can just, you can set messaging up like that where you are mostly doing the credit claim and then you have a little dig at the Republicans added into it, like all Republicans voted no. Or you can structure your message where it's mostly focused on Republicans and make a comment about how Democrats delivered it, right? But in any case, the point is, like with credit claiming, it's only useful if A, it is presented in a frame that you got this thing and they didn't want you to have it, or B, you need this thing and they won't give it to you, right? Rather, so in other words, the Republican Party uses a makers and takers frame, right? They're coming to take your stuff. It's not enough just to tell people we got you roads and bridges. You have to add in an element that personalizes it to them and makes them feel this action, voting for a Democrat, is either A, how I protect this tax rebate that I am getting now that I didn't have, or this healthcare, or B, I must remove the obstacle to having this thing that I want. And that obstacle isn't corporations, big oil, or all the code names we use. Those are mechanisms, right? Or those are sources. The mechanism is the Republican Party, right? And we are not making it easy at all for people to identify the villain, because you'll find this, and I'm sure there's people in this chat room right now shaking their heads. Yeah. Because we spend a lot of time villainizing ourselves, right? In that process, like even within our own activist community, I have to sometimes push people to see the connection between the corporation and the big pharma and the Republican Party, which is the mechanism that's going to, exert that influence, right? And so getting people to kind of think and understand, like, we want to make sure that our oxygen always is doing that lift of brand building up, brand building down for them.
Yeah. And
just get that dog out of the room. So
no, that's okay.
I love it. You gotta love pets. My cat sometimes makes an appearance.
I have my dog locked out of this room right now. So
my dog is a strategist. Like my Australian Shepherd is literally a strategist. So like he just came up with that. Like, oh, okay, if I bark in the room, she won't shut me in there either.
See? Very, very, very strong messaging on the part of that dog. We're talking about extremism, and you mentioned how January 6th is, starting to break through, and the hearings. Here in New York, we've got a bunch of extremists. Lee Zeldin rallied with the Oath Keepers. He and Nicole Malliotakis hosted Lauren Boebert last summer at a fundraiser. Elise Stefanik and Claudia Tenney vie regularly for the most ultra MAGA cult member they could be. And we got this guy, Carl Palladino, upstate, who's a Hitler worshiper, who's running for Congress. So we've got plenty of extremism in blue New York State. But I'm wondering about like the best way to message that. Is there something, and I think you mentioned like how you bring it home for people, but do you have thoughts on the best way to sell that negative aspect of extremism to people who should be convinced that it's crazy and they cannot vote for these people?
I talk to people who are in some way or another in charge of some component of messaging, either for an org or for something larger, all the time. And sometimes I'll hear something that really surprised. I mean, it doesn't surprise me because I knew that when I embarked on this reform movement thing, that there was issues. But so many people who are running messaging genuinely are shocked when I tell them, no, people don't know that. Like, they don't know that. Like that news headline that you just said, everyone knows. No, it's the exact opposite. Like, you know it, and all the people that you know it, all the people you're in your own friend network are like you, so they know it too. Like, all of the movers and shakers know it. But if you were to go out to Long Island, and my mom's from Long Island, so I feel like I can drop Long Island, you go out to Babylon and go into one of the grocery stores in Babylon and just start yelling about like something like Adam Schiff or Mitch McConnell, like people are going to be like, what the hell's wrong with that crazy person? They're going to know who you're talking about. Okay. So and that's in New York, right? Like a highly college educated kind of weird place. Right. So getting people to understand, like, they will not know, the voters of New York in these like competitive races will not know the Republican Party is collapsing into fascism, radicalism, extremism, whichever word you can choose on, unless we tell them. And when we do so, it's not enough just to say, hey, the Republican Party is, got this radicalist element and they're crazy and they're talking about white nationalism. I mean, those things are great. And there's a lot of those ads that get made and put out now. And any ad that's doing good, advertising that makes Republicans look bad makes me happy, but it's still not optimal, right? Because what we really want to be doing in terms of our advertising strategies with people is we want to be making it personal, right? It's not just that Glenn Youngkin's going to become governor of Virginia. It's that Glenn Youngkin's going to become governor of Virginia, and then he's going to put cameras in your kid's classroom and turn your kid into a breakfast narc, like in the Third Reich or whatever, right? Like, you have to get Glenn Youngkin's going to come and he's going to, repeal Medicaid expansion and steal everybody's healthcare and let people die on the street. So you'll notice I use rhetoric that is intentionally hyperbolic and intentionally meant to get you to see an image. So like I'll get a postcard script from a group and it will say, North Carolina Democrats got you clean water, which is good because now we're making progress and we're credit claiming and stuff, right? But like, why not, Democrats gave you safe water that won't poison your children, right? Like, we got to make it, we want, like, when you're creating copy, like, can you see what you're describing? If not, is there a way to talk about it that's more visual? Because it's one thing to tell people we got to make our ads emotive. It's what I'm trying to tell you now is how, like, what that means, right? You make it emotive by decreasing your reliance on complete factual accuracy. We can't say women because sometimes it might be a pregnant person. Like, okay, pregnant, we got to protect the rights of pregnant people is not going to have the same rhetorical value in a campaign situation as women. Okay. It's too long. It's complex. It opens you up to like, what the hell do they mean? Right? Like, we want to be making, there's a purpose for messaging to increase diversity and representation, but it should not be the ads that we're using to win elections. It cannot be if we're doing that. Now, sometimes that works out, right? You're sending something out, to the coalition and blah, blah. But if you're trying to move white voters in the suburbs, guys, you're not going to move these people by making them thinking they care about the fate of other fucking people. They don't care. Right? And that's because the bell curve, right? So I'm like kind of drawing a rainbow. When we talk about bell curve, we talk about data points that can gather. So test scores for 100 students will distribute and we'll make a curve, right? Like, liberals are on the left side of the curve. So we're much more focused on the collective and much more compassionate, empathetic, and like that stuff does us, right? But all humans on the curve are still self-interested. Okay, even the best of us have psychological things that make us care about in groups and not out groups, and move better when it's our own selves that are threatened, or our own in group, especially family groups, than out groups. So right now, a lot of the messaging is about we-ness, okay? And the shit that I make is about you-ness. So I don't know if that makes any sense. So like, my point is this: it doesn't matter how you do it, just do it, because any any oxygen ads, direct mailers, digital ads, billboards, whatever, is as long as it's achieving the goal of making people discount or fear the change component of the midterm effect, then it's good stuff to me.
So for the midterms, the House may well turn on New York's congressional races. Long Island, Hudson Valley, New York 11, which is Staten Island and Brooklyn. We have at least 7 swing seats, maybe 3 possible pickups. There are many suburban and ex-urban voters who are going to decide these seats. What does your research tell you? You talked about Roe, but what are some of the other issues that are going to move these voters?
Yeah, this cycle is going to be about 3 things: the economy, inflation, gas, whatever, 2 things, it's all in that, right? And about the loss of women's rights, right? It's not about abortion. It is about abortion. You can say abortion, that's fine, but you want to broaden out. We have no bodily autonomy. It's not a matter of like a choice to go to a restaurant. It's a choice of whether I get to live or not, and it probably shouldn't be the state. So, there literally cannot be enough wedge and intensive like fear, threat, saturation into the suburbs of New York to satisfy the doc, okay? Because you just said, oh, we've got 6, 7 seats, and then we've got these 3 pickup opportunities. And I'm here to tell you, if you leave even one of those 3 on the table, that we almost certainly cannot hit 218, okay? And the only thing that I care about in my efforts is a national map that gets us to 51 and 218. Anything on top of that in the Senate is good and possible, which wasn't before. But the House, guys, it will take us, if we were to hit 218, it will be the greatest upset in political history. So like when I'm looking at like the 40 races, like in the redistrict, I'm like, okay, how do I hit 218? And there is no pathway for me to get there without repicking up the dropped races of California that should never have been lost, and expanding your caucus in New York State and other really intensively blue areas. And let me tell you how specifically you can do that, guys, because right through those suburban House races, that's our bread and butter in a midterm. The midterm electorate, the electorate is always more, has an education bias, but it's really pronounced in everything that's not the presidential. The presidential is the one where non-college educated whites, right? You just can't lose them by huge margins. But in these midterms, like where we really want to be doing is we want to be finding all these Rockefeller Republicans that are still hanging on, and they are there. We can see them in data. Okay. How do we know who they are? They're independents. They're no longer willing to say they're Republicans. They maybe sat out a couple of these crazy primaries because they're like, I don't want to vote for these crazy nuts, right? And where those people are, what we want to do to them is what the Republican Party did to non-college educated whites and is now doing to non-college educated everybody. And that is, we want to break their brand loyalty. Okay. We don't want to go in there and try to sell them on our candidate and our policies. They're de-aligning conservatives, right? What we want to do is they're feeling icky about the thing that they're buying at the store. And we want to make sure that when we're done with them psychologically, they can't bear to buy it. They're like, God, that thing is awful, to the point where they either de-align finally and vote for a Democrat, or they don't vote, right? So, because of Roe, the night that Kansas happened, I was doing media and I was saying, listen, if Stacey Abrams wedges Roe in the burbs around Atlanta, then she can catch Warnock on the differential for candidate equality. Okay. But it takes getting in there, putting a good chunk of money to the job, and hitting these suburban areas with "you will not be free." Your wife, if she's dying from an ectopic pregnancy, it won't be you that decides, it's the state, right? And just really, really getting New Yorkers, especially these New Yorkers who feel comfortable in their own blue state, to feel the threat.
Yeah, absolutely. And feeling the threat is key. One aspect where we're kind of on defense in New York, as you've probably read extensively about, is on crime, public safety, and the justice reform that the state has passed. So we have bail reform, which has become a huge wedge issue that Republicans are trying to exploit. And their messaging, which we should do more of, is just blunt force trauma. You will be killed by people
Yes.
who are out on bail. Your whole family is going to be wiped out. Don't even think about going into the city because it's a hellscape. Those kinds of things. And Shannon and I get this question all the time, so I want to get your take on it, Rachel. How do we answer that, and how do we turn it to get more to that offensive posture?
Now, so that I'm trying to teach people how to pivot and attack, right?
Right.
And it's like it's a technique, and it can take many forms, but let me show you one. Right. So you just asked me, they're just attacking. Oh, don't go to the city. It's people are dying, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, why are people dying? Because the Republican fucking Party is flooding America with illegal guns, right? So like, I never spend one sentence talking about the idiocy of no bond, okay? Because it's a stupid policy, and that's why we're in this mess. I don't do that. I don't talk about how we have to reform criminal justice because marginalized groups have been marginalized for fucking ever, even though that's true too. And that's what my heart wants to talk about, because I'm a PhD, guys. And nope, not doing any of that shit. Instead, I'm going to pivot and attack, and I'm going to take that moment and make them afraid to mention crime, right? Like if I was going up against one of these guys, they'd be afraid to mention the word crime, because if they did, I would lit into them about mass genocide in our cities that they've been fueling for years with their extremist gun agenda, and then Donald Trump, right? I mean, this is the party of rule of law, and that gives me an opportunity. By the way, is there any candidates or people advising candidates like this? A debate situation is really great for this. That gives me an opportunity, by the way, to remind everybody about Donald Trump's crimes, right? And that the Republican Party is a lawless, cult, right? So I'm trying to get people to understand, like, if we were having a meeting of our club, like, it's one thing to talk about policy, but like anything that's public facing should not be seen as an opportunity for substantive conversation. It should be seen as an opportunity to leverage the political, assets that we have. And you watch Meet the Press or these Sunday talk shows all the time. How many times do you ever watch the Sunday talk shows and feel like the left won the debate? Almost zero, right? And the reason is because Chris Christie and that other chick, Sarah, whatever, they're skilled at what I'm trying to teach you. And they don't dwell on their own shit. They may say like one sentence about it, two, and then they pop into pivot and attack every time.
Totally. And and does Chuck Todd ever say anything? No. So.
Yeah. And it matters, guys. Like, it matters at the aggregate. All that stuff matters. So like, we really want to fix, down here, because if we start fixing it on the way that we do things, it will bubble up and it will germinate. But I can't stress enough, if you're on a TV interview or a panel or a debate and it's a Republican thing, like a partisan thing, instead of like talking policy and having a wonky conversation about it, which is our instinct, pivot and attack.
So talking about pivoting and attacking, Rachel, one of the things you talk about is beating Republicans at their own game. And this is something that Barbara mentioned in the Q&A about there went my earring about
that was a beautiful earring.
Yeah, I'm keeping things interesting. When it comes to GOP messaging, she says, is it just the repetition that makes GOP messaging memorable? Is it because it's the extreme lie? How do we beat them at their own game? How do we compete in this arena?
So it breaks my heart that I was not able to make myself popular enough to get a Crown book deal to write this book for the 22 cycle. It's going to come out in 2023, right? So like, it sucks because like in the book, I'm going to specifically explain how to do those things and why to do them. So it really sucks that like there's not a way to communicate this at the mass level to people in time for this cycle, because this cycle is going to determine so much about what happens in the 2024 cycle, especially in the Midwestern states, where those governorships will control basically whether we have a free and fair election in the blue wall. I mean, we can kind of have fake elections in Arizona and Georgia. Not that we want those things, but we can survive them if we have the Midwest on team democracy. But without that, we're going to be in big trouble. So teaching people how to do various components, most of it rolls into like a big strategic framework, which is about oxygen on them. If you're going to create a referendum effect about the in party, you need a lot of oxygen about the about the out party. You need a lot of oxygen about the out party. So one thing I've been telling people is, focus on things that that if you wiped away your knowledge of all the things and you were talking kind of to a blank slate voter, like what would be the most horrendously terrible thing for them to know about the Republican Party, right? Not some, like all the high hanging stuff is very complex. You don't need that. You need make America great again, build the wall, right? So like our stuff, like we hate concisement, and we definitely hate, it's not, I don't know if we hate it, it's just we can't think that way. And it's hard for us too in our circles to remember that like we're atypicals, like none of us on this call or in this meeting or any of your friends probably are normal human beings in terms of the bell curve of American civic life. So we know all of this stuff and they don't, right? So you want to make sure that you're coming up with a slogan or a saying that is 5th grade reading level and hitting like the big concept, not some micro aspect. Yes, repealing Roe will cause problems, especially in the red states for women who lack access, and it's going to definitely disproportionately. Okay, that's true, but let's just say like the message should be, without Roe, women will die. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And you did reference Trump's slogans, and those were incredibly effective. Trump is he's all throughout our politics, even in New York, and he's there today. The investigations continue. January 6th, we feel like people are starting to talk about those hearings, and there's a cumulative effect on it, the criminalization of Trump. What's your advice as to how congressional candidates, for example, in New York can leverage Trump and turn his record against the entire party?
Yeah, I mean, I would explain it this way. In 2020, Jamie Harrison ran down to South Carolina. And I can assure you, fine folks, Jamie did not run on a platform of defunding the police and enacting socialism, okay? Yet, guess what the ad campaign against him by Lindsey Graham's campaign and the RNC was focused on? How Jamie Harrison wanted to defund the police and turn America into a socialist hellhole, right? It's like, we have to get over accuracy, right? There should be no, I'll talk to someone like, but my guy didn't do that. I'm like, it doesn't matter, right? He is serving in a line and running to serve on a political party for whom that is the platform. So by allegiance, right? So, it's not even really a reach, right? Because it's kind of a reach when you're making the claim about socialism, was we don't even have paid family leave here in America. Okay, we're not on the cusp of socialism in a country where 40% of people have no health care, right? But we are on the cusp of fascism, right? And so we really, really want to make that clear, to bring out, it's a macro issue. A good way to describe this, maybe for people who watch the Sunday shows, Nancy Mace from South Carolina won. She's a House member, is one of these members that are in a marginal race and in a tough circumstance in the House as a Republican candidate. And she did the Sunday show, and all she wanted to do was get tape video, meet the press on it, talking about how moderate she is on abortion. Okay. And in our system, that would normally work, right? I don't know who the hell her opponent is or what they're doing, but in our system, she'd get away with it, right? Like they'd like, oh, Nancy Mace made comments about like her position, so we can't do that. And I'm like, no, dude. Ask Nancy Mace this: if a total abortion ban comes on the House floor, will she vote for it? And I bet you the answer is going to be yes, right? So she should be saddled with the same policy radicalism as everybody else. If your House incumbent took a vote to decertify the election, like Mike Garcia, great. You can say that specifically in the ad, but if they didn't, and they're in the House now because they came in the class or whatever, right? You can still say this person supports re-electing a man who tried to overthrow the government.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So yeah, that's how you can broaden it out.
And the party, I mean, here in New York, again, blue New York, the Republican Party has been taken over by extremists. I mean, so all of the leadership of the party is extreme. The major figures of the party here in New York State are very extreme, and we can just tag them with that.
Yeah, and like for me, you guys have such a great op because you have Lise Stefanik up there, so you can tie her visually. You want visual like cues, right? The way that they nationalize things is they understood, okay, average people don't know who their member of Congress is, don't care, let alone a state legislature, okay? So like the advertising is actually designed to tell these people, hey, you like Trump? This dude is connected to Trump and is on Team Trump, and voting for him is kind of like helping Trump, right? And they mostly do this in visuals. So like with Stefanik, you use a nefarious, versions of her and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy and Trump, and immediately people will see her as more radical than if you could sit there for like a million years and try to say that she's radical.
Right.
They're going to see that that's what they did with the squad, right? Like the squad guys, we didn't get there. Like we evolved to it in 2010 when Michael Steele devised the strategy that I'm trying to teach you now. What he did was he put Pelosi and Obama together and made them look evil, right? And that worked for, 2010, they killed it. 2014, they killed it. Whatever. But once Obama was gone, they found out that actually like nobody hates Joe Biden. They don't have that because he's not black, right? But also like he's not a woman, so they don't hate him, right? He's a white old dude. And so instead they're like, okay, well, what are we going to do? Because like Obama's, out of style. So they used Pelosi and they brought in the first member of the squad who was AOC. Okay. And over time, those Pelosi AOCs grew to Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and all the others. So that now, if I go walk around like a voter, part of the voter file that's targeted by Republicans, there is pretty good name ID about AOC. Okay. It is huge name ID. That is not something that you would find outside of like the Republican ecosystem. And that's because, even like major figures, many Americans don't know any of like the governmental figures, right? So like when you've gotten your part of the coalition at 80-90% name ID on some freshman congresswoman from New York, like that means the shit that you're doing works, right? So like that's like teaching people, hey, we've tested McConnell and he doesn't test in ads. No, we're not. What we're doing is we're making guilt by association. Here's this person you know and hate, and this person you don't know anything about and don't care about, and we're making you fear and respond to this person because of their association with this other person.
I want to go back a little bit and talk about New York being a blue state. Everybody's like, oh, New York is a blue state, but New York is a blue state with huge swaths of red. So, which is challenging for people who live in districts like where Stefanik is. So how can we bridge the gap between, the urban suburban issues with the rural ones? How can you basically create winning campaigns in these red parts of New York?
And I think it's always important to kind of think about like in the actual context. So like labs are one thing, but the actual field, your messaging strategy will not be in a vacuum, it will compete. Okay. So like, hey, New York, Representative Smith voted for infrastructure, got the Hudson Tunnel fixed, whatever. I'm just making stuff up. I don't know if that's real, right? Blah, 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 blah. And then from the other side, Joseph Smith is a terrible man. He wants to teach your men children to become women, right? Can you see how like yeah, you're not going to win that, dude. Like, so when I say fight fire with fire, what I mean is, okay, if they're sending that, they're not trying to win hearts and minds here, folks. They gave that up in their advertising starting in 04, started wheedling it out every cycle. And you can see this in quantitative data. Our shit's all about how we're going to work across the aisle and be bipartisan. Those candidates got wiped out in 2014. Okay, because people love bipartisanship, but it doesn't motivate them to vote and to vote for you. And your advertising should always do two things in one piece, not two separate pieces doing two separate things. One piece doing two things, moving voters, our coalition, which includes those independent leaders, to the polls, right? Because they're afraid not to vote, which is what the Republicans do. And then pushing independent, that conversion pool, away from voting for your opponent. And as tempting as it is to focus on yourself and what you're going to do and what you want to do, I am here to tell you what will perform best for you is to hit that conversion pool and make them absolutely afraid not to vote and to not vote for you, right? Because of what this other thing is going to do to them.
You mentioned how people don't hate President Biden, but you also, like, so the top line analysis of the midterms is always what's Biden's rating? It's terrible. So Democrats are going to lose a midterm. Biden's had a bunch of significant wins. I mean, his presidency in 18 months is a significantly successful presidency. But yet his ratings are down. What would your advice be to candidates and organizers like we have here on is the presidential rating the be all and end all, or is it overrated in terms of the midterms? And B, how to talk about where the president is in districts where, thanks to our court system, we now have sort of like Biden +2 districts or Trump +3 districts, like a few very, very close districts.
Yeah, I mean, that's here's what I would say. And so at the beginning of this Zoom or this meeting, I talked about how polarization isn't a buzzword, it's quantifiable. One of the things that has quantitatively changed is presidential approval. Okay, economic approval and presidential approval are both now catching much more the partisanship, the distribution of Republicans and Democrats. That 40-30% independent pool that you think is really robust is actually not. Most of them are leaners. They admit I lean Republican. And then when you look at their voting behavior, it's almost as 9 out of 10 times partisan as a card-carrying partisans, okay? So we get down to a much smaller conversion pool of independents there, right? And, what we know about presidential approval is that small conversion pool is almost entirely tuned out, but civically minded people who don't have passion. If they had interest and passion, most times, I mean, my mother-in-law is an exception, so you probably know somebody who's an exception, okay? She would go and research the two candidates and genuinely vote for the one that was better, right? But most independents, and you can ask anybody that runs focus groups for a living, actually don't know a lot about civic events. They don't know about current events. I mean, when I try to tell you guys that you're freaks, I'm really, really mean. You are information 1%ers, okay? No one does what you do. Reading the news, watching the news, following events. No, I mean, people, what I call the normals, like they will hear about a tornado that takes out 150 people or a school shooting that's big enough. Now you got to kill 50 people. But when the Comey memo comes out, they're gonna know that, dude. Even something that's really big, like the Roe memo leak, which had much better norm saturation than most normal political news would, because again, it turns women into second-class citizens who are going to die by execution of the state. It's still there is still the possibility you could go into Walmart or Trader Joe's, and you could ask people, hey, did you hear about what the court did today? And they'd be like, well, I don't know, don't follow any news, right? So these independents are very conditioned on atmospheric impressions. And so, Tom, when you were talking about how Biden wasn't getting things done, that narrative, that sausage making fest that they had for the first 3 or 4 months of the administration, there's literally nothing that could have happened to us that was worse than that. Okay. All of the progressive oxygen was focused on Manchin and Sinema. The media cycle is focused on Manchin and Sinema. And you would think, and they think when they make the content, that your average recipient of this information is going to understand the unstated part. Democrats are trying to do this alone because no Republicans will do it. But that's not what happens, okay? What gets through is these people control the government. They said they were going to do shit and they didn't do it. That's it. That's what your base knowledge is. So for some like level, you see like a decline in that approval rating that is reflective of those things and is genuinely like an assessment, okay? But generally speaking, what we saw and what we've seen really through George W., but got much worse with Obama and Trump, is inelastic approval ratings. So approval ratings that are banded much tighter, like in the 70s and 80s, you could go 20 points over like the Iran-Contra hostage history, situation. Donald Trump, when the pandemic came in, they did polling across the world of all the world leaders. You could see the ones that handled it well, the ones that didn't, because their approval ratings went significantly up or significantly down. Do you want to know what happened to Donald Trump's? Flatline, dude, all the way across. Okay. That is because our culture, our democracy is incredibly sick. A body politic that is healthy is not incapable of responding to stimulus. It cannot respond to stimulus. Did not even Ukraine. There was almost no rally around the flag effect. So my point is this: approval is never going to be more than 44 for Joe Biden. If he cures cancer tomorrow, it's still going to be 44. Okay. The floor, though, can get lower for us than it can for them, because in the data for the whole Trump presidency, it was always 90% of Republicans say, I support him. Only 10 would be honest, right? Like, oh, well, he told me to drink bleach this week. He's an idiot, right? And we're not seeing that. Polarization's asymmetrical, and it matters that it's asymmetrical, because what you're seeing in Democratic data is more like 80-20. Like there's 20% of card-carrying Democrats who have been telling pollsters they disapprove of Joe Biden. Okay. And that additional 10 points off the partisan like component of that, total score, it matters. It really does depress it. So I tweeted the other day and I was like, no, number one, we're gifted by the fact that Joe Biden has the secret deal with Schumer, and then the vet burn bill, and the Republicans were so stupid. They cost themselves so much with that vet burning bill, like delaying the vote on that. So we have this like series of events that have come together to create now a narrative that Tom was talking about, which is, boy, actually, it's not that Democrats haven't done shit. Joe Biden is actually one of the most effective, presidents we've had in 2 decades, right? In terms of productivity, right? And so I think what we're going to see is more of that allegiance coming back. And I know it will come back once campaign effects start coming out onto the airwaves, because we have this concept in political science called latent partisanship, where partisan stuff will actually reinforce and activate you when your partisanship has gone down. That's what's happened with Roe. With a lot of our coalition from 18, it's been reinvigorated. And so, I lost my last thought, but yeah.
Rachel, I just want to go back to Roe, because Judith had a question, Judith Hunter, in the chat, and she wants to know, does it make sense to talk about a national abortion ban?
Yes, it does. To me, like if I had total control, I'd be running ads all across the country. They want to pass a national abortion ban, and it would be a total ban, and this is what will happen to you and your daughters and your sisters and your wives, it's not. And then it also is an opportunity, if there's any candidates here, especially if we could fix New York, it would have a effect, right? Because the New York system is a nationalized system. So things that change here will germinate out. And so what I would say is you want to put your opponent in an awkward position anytime you can. Run ads. What is, Elise Stefanik, she's going to vote for this total abortion ban, right? You can use that as an opportunity to define the stakes for your own particular person.
And I'll put a couple together from the questions in the chat. Our our side loves to talk about climate change. It's a very important issue to our base. All of our organizers and activists. It's a top 3, top 5 issue. Young
Yes.
people, etc. However, we just passed the biggest climate change bill, and we called it an inflation bill. How do we like, what's the best? Is there a good way to message climate change in these contests?
Now listen, I'm gonna say this. It was a major fucking victory to get Democrats to call that shit inflation.
Yeah, I kind of thought so too.
And the advantage is now I'm gonna spend the next 3 months, and I'm happy to help you do this too, right? I'm gonna argue Republicans voted to raise inflation on everybody.
Right.
Like, that's the only thing I care about. Like,
they're pro-inflation.
But Tom, I'm so glad you mentioned climate, because like, I want to wedge the hell out of climate change in the young people thing. There's 2 things that we could drive enthusiasm under, or 3 now, because young people have sex, like lots of it, and they are very concerned about how not having abortion access affects sex, right? And so you really are seeing this backlash effect out of there. But climate is the thing, right? And when you ask any activist, so people in this group, I'm not judging you, it's not your fault. I'm just going to point out something. Why hasn't it passed? It hasn't passed because of Congress hasn't passed it. Politicians are in the pockets of deep, big oil and the corporations, and that's not why climate action hasn't happened. It hasn't passed because in 2006, when we almost started to do something about climate change, because Nancy Pelosi and Newt Gingrich did an ad together to tell us we should. Okay, when we did that, the oil and gas industry was like, and that's when they did the entire hoax thing. They paid the tobacco industry to come in and create literally the same denialism movement that they used for tobacco. And then now we're fast forwarding years and years. Now they finally have shut the fuck up about this hoax crap, most of them, right? They're not bothering to lie anymore about the hoax, but they refuse to let the world, the entire world's climate is in the hands of these radical Republican extremists who want Earth to burn, right? So like, I'm trying to push people to understand, like, it's good that we got this climate, and it's good. There's some good stuff in this climate. But in terms of winning shit, you're going to get less out of touting these climate wins politically than you will if you wedge it and say, hey, kids, don't want to live on a barren, burning earth. Better vote, and vote all the Republicans out of office, top to bottom, right? And really put the onus for climate change in action where it belongs, on the veto power of the Republican Party in the US Senate.
Great.
Q&A, and I think it's kind of a good thing to end on, is how do we get this message out? I mean, we're all in our own bubbles, and but a lot of us, I mean, here on this call, we work on campaigns, like canvas, have friends within our own circles. How can we, how can the people on this call continue to make a difference? How can they get the message out? Somebody wanted to know, where can you find boilerplate messages? What is your advice to people? Because everybody here wants to make a difference. So how can they?
Yeah, I mean, I have a project ongoing to build like a toolkit that, I just don't know that I can. I mean, I'm not in charge of building that. Obviously, I don't build web products. But yes, so to answer people's questions, there's actually quite a few groups working on providing access to, pre-created content and copy, not mine specifically, but still it's copy that I think is 50% more effective than the old versions of doing things, right? So like, I would strongly urge people to start pulling and relying on those resources now. There's an initiative within like the progressive groups so I was telling them, listen, yes, it's true, like climate, you have gay rights, you have climate, you have women's rights, you've got all these competing factions for attention, but where does it all come back to? It comes back to freedom and democracy, right? So like, if you care about the climate, if you care about women's rights, if you care about, immigration or whatever it is, it is bounded under this one banner, right? Of we are facing an existential rights and freedoms threat here. And that allows us to instead of focusing on the niche of the particular coalition that we're fighting for, it allows us to put everybody under one banner, and that banner is they're coming for your freedom, or we are the party of freedom, or whatever you're comfortable with. So, I can't say like there's a website that I would point somebody to, that has all that together right now, and that's why I'm writing the book, right? But following me on Twitter is a big help. I teach a lot of people how to do electioneering from my timeline all day long. It's basically like I treat it as an ongoing class that I run at university all day. And that class is to teach the media not to say allegedly about fake things, because then it just legitimates it. Okay.
I saw some of that today, by the way.
Yeah. And, to teach other people in this space, or at least to encourage them to steal. I mean, I really want people literally to steal my shit, is what I say. Like, if I put something out and you want to pay for a distribution of it and call it yours, go do it, dude. Like, whatever, right? Like, we want everybody talking referendum messaging that stake frames policy, that makes people feel they have a personal invested interest and not just a collective need to participate, and rolling as much of that content into voters' eyes is what I care about, and it's extremely expensive, as Shannon just pointed out. It's not something that you can do without a good war chest. I am a little concerned about California and New York this cycle, because that's the two major donor sources for our entire coalition. I've talked a lot in the last 6 months about the financial asymmetry that we're facing due to the fact that the GOP has put together like an entire cadre of billionaires to spend against us, and grassroots small donations cannot compete against billions and billions of dollars. It's not going to happen. So what I'm telling people in New York and California is this: it's good to look out, and obviously none of our elections would ever survive without your money, but please do not neglect what's going on, especially in the House races there, because we need you guys to clean sweep them. We need that. And if I can be of assistance in helping you devise a message strategy or tweak a message strategy to do that in one of those key competitive races, be sure to reach out, because there is nothing more important than each of these 40 or 45 House races across America right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rachel. I mean, that is our message, and you put it beautifully. And speaking of conducting a class, this was a master class for all of us. So we really appreciate it. I feel like there's a lot of work to do, but you have inspired us to go out and do that and take offense, go on the offense and hammer those people, because that's the only way that we're going to get there. And I would recommend that everybody who's on follow Rachel on Twitter, because that's kind of your daily. You're in it every single day, and there's just great stuff there.
Yeah, I got to tell you, all day. I mean, I'm working on ads and whatever the hell I'm doing, but I am also using that Twitter to try to get as much of this content to people as possible, in lieu of having this book option. And again, like I'd point people to any of the messaging that's coming out now is better than what our old messaging was. So don't be afraid to use it, and it doesn't have to be my message. It just has to be a message that performs the goal simultaneously. One ad, one direct mailer should be doing two things for you every time. It should be making it really hard for our coalition not to show up and vote, and making it very difficult for the conversion pool to not vote for you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
All righty. It was so great to join you guys. Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Great. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.